Marcus walked through the heavy glass doors of Lincoln High School, his backpack weighing down his shoulders like the anxiety pressing against his chest. The hallways stretched before him like a maze of unfamiliar faces and echoing voices. Moving to a new city in the middle of junior year felt like stepping into a movie where everyone already knew their roles, and he was the outsider trying to find his place. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across polished floors that squeaked under his sneakers. Students clustered in groups, their laughter bouncing off lockers that lined the walls like metal sentries. Marcus clutched his schedule tighter, the paper already wrinkled from his sweaty palms. Room 204 for first period English seemed miles away as he navigated through the crowd of teenagers who barely glanced in his direction. His previous school in Ohio had been smaller, friendlier somehow. Here, everything felt bigger and more intimidating. The students dressed differently, talked faster, and carried themselves with a confidence that Marcus wished he could borrow for just one day. He found his locker after 3 attempts, fumbling with the combination while trying to ignore the curious stares from nearby students who whispered among themselves. The warning bell rang, sending a wave of urgency through the corridor. Marcus grabbed his English textbook and hurried toward the stairwell, following the flow of students like a fish swimming upstream. His heart pounded as he climbed the steps, wondering if anyone would notice he was new, or if he would simply blend into the background like he hoped. When he finally found room 204, most seats were already taken. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, looked up from her desk with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She motioned for him to come forward, and Marcus felt dozens of eyes following his movement across the classroom. His face burned with embarrassment. As she introduced him to the class, her voice cutting through the morning chatter. "Everyone, we have a new student joining us today. This is Marcus Thompson, and he's moved here from Columbus, Ohio." The announcement felt like a spotlight burning down on him. Some students smiled politely, others returned to their conversations. But Marcus noticed a group near the back of the room exchanging looks he couldn't quite interpret. Mrs. Henderson assigned him a seat in the middle row, directly in front of 3 boys who seemed to take up more space than their desks should allow. As Marcus settled into his chair, he heard one of them whisper something that made the others snicker. He pretended not to notice, focusing instead on pulling out his notebook and trying to look like he belonged. The boy sitting directly behind him was named Tyler, according to the teacher's attendance call. Tyler had broad shoulders, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the kind of confident smirk that suggested he was used to getting his way. His friends, Jake and Connor, flanked him like loyal lieutenants, their eyes scanning the room for entertainment or trouble. Throughout the English lesson, Marcus felt small things hitting the back of his head. Paper balls, eraser bits, the occasional pencil tap against his chair. Each time he turned around, Tyler and his friends were looking elsewhere, their faces masks of innocence. Mrs. Henderson was too busy discussing Shakespeare to notice the subtle harassment happening right under her nose. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of first period, Marcus quickly gathered his things and headed for the door. He thought he had escaped when Tyler's voice called out behind him, loud enough for half the class to hear. "Hey, new kid. Love your shoes. Did you get them from the bargain bin?" Marcus looked down at his worn sneakers, suddenly self-conscious about the scuff marks and faded color. They weren't expensive, but they were comfortable and had gotten him through many basketball games back home. Now they felt like a neon sign advertising his family's modest means. The laughter that followed. Tyler's comment wasn't cruel, but it stung nonetheless. Marcus forced himself to keep walking, his cheeks burning with humiliation. This was exactly what he had feared about starting over at a new school. He had hoped to fly under the radar for at least a few days before attracting any unwanted attention. As he walked to his next class, Marcus reminded himself that it was only the first day. Maybe Tyler was just testing him, seeing how the new kid would react. Maybe tomorrow would be different. He had dealt with difficult people before, though never in a place where he knew absolutely no one. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introduction syllabi and awkward moments of sitting alone while other students chatted with friends they had known for years. By lunchtime, Marcus was exhausted from the constant effort of trying to appear confident and unaffected by his isolation. He bought a sandwich from the cafeteria and found an empty table near the windows, hoping to eat in peace while observing the social dynamics of his new environment. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation and laughter, hundreds of teenagers divided into their established groups and hierarchies. That's when he noticed Tyler and his crew approaching his table, their lunch trays in hand and expressions that suggested they weren't planning to offer friendship. Marcus's stomach dropped as he realized his quiet lunch was about to become much more complicated. Tyler slammed his lunch tray down on the table across from Marcus with enough force to make the plastic cups jump. His friends Jake and Connor flanked him on either side, their faces wearing matching grins that didn't reach their eyes. The sudden noise drew attention from nearby tables, and Marcus felt the weight of curious stares settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Mind if we sit with the new guy?" Tyler asked, though he was already settling into his chair. It wasn't really a question, and Marcus knew it. The three boys spread out around the small table, claiming territory like wolves marking their domain. Marcus's appetite vanished instantly, but he forced himself to take another bite of his sandwich, determined not to show how nervous they made him. "So, Marcus from Ohio," Tyler continued, dragging out his name like it tasted funny in his mouth. "What brings your family to our little town? Dad lose his job or something?" The question hit closer to home than Marcus cared to admit. His father had indeed lost his position at the manufacturing plant, forcing their family to relocate for his mother's new job at the hospital. Marcus swallowed his food carefully before responding. "My mom got a promotion. She's a nurse administrator. Now." He kept his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He had learned long ago that showing fear only made situations like this worse. Jake leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "That's nice. Bet you miss your old friends, huh? Probably had lots of friends back in Ohio." There was something mocking in his tone, as if he already knew the answer would disappoint them all. The truth was, Marcus hadn't had many close friends back home either. He was naturally quiet, preferring books to parties and basketball to social gatherings. But he wasn't about to admit that to these three, who seemed to feed off weakness like sharks sensing blood in the water. "I keep in touch with them," Marcus replied, taking a sip of his chocolate milk. It tasted like cardboard in his suddenly dry mouth. Around them, the cafeteria continued its usual chaos, but Marcus felt isolated in this bubble of tension that Tyler and his friends had created. Connor, who had been quietly observing until now, suddenly spoke up. "You play any sports, new boy? You look like you might be decent at track. Running away from things." His comment earned chuckles from Tyler and Jake, and Marcus felt heat creeping up his neck. "Basketball," Marcus answered simply. He had been varsity starter at his old school, but something told him these three wouldn't be impressed by his athletic credentials from Ohio. Everything from his previous life seemed diminished in this new environment. Tyler's eyes lit up with interest, but not the good kind. "Basketball, really? You any good, or are you one of those bench warmers who thinks he's hot stuff?" He gestured toward Marcus's slight frame with his plastic fork. "You don't look like much of a threat on the court." Marcus had heard this before. At 5'10" and lean, he didn't have the imposing physical presence of players like Tyler, who clearly spent hours in the weight room. But Marcus had always relied on speed, accuracy, and court vision rather than brute strength. His old coach used to say he played like he was 6 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier. "I hold my own," Marcus said quietly, finishing the last bite of his sandwich. He started to gather his trash, hoping to escape before this conversation took a worse turn. But Tyler wasn't finished with him yet. "Tell you what, Columbus," Tyler said, using Marcus's hometown like an insult. "We play pickup games in the gym, after school sometimes. Maybe you should come show us what Ohio basketball looks like. Might be entertaining." The invitation was clearly a trap, but Marcus found himself nodding anyway. "Maybe I will." The words came out before he could stop them, and he immediately regretted the surge of pride that had pushed them past his lips. Tyler's grin widened, showing teeth that were too white and too perfect. "Great. We'll see what you're really made of then." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Jake and Connor followed suit, leaving their half-eaten lunches behind like they had accomplished what they came for. As they walked away, Marcus heard Tyler say something to his friends that made them all laugh. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were planning something, and he had just walked right into their web. The rest of lunch period crawled by with Marcus sitting alone at the now empty table. Students around him continued their conversations and laughter, but he felt completely invisible. A few people glanced in his direction, and he wondered what they thought about the interaction they had witnessed. Did they see him as the new kid, who was about to get put in his place, or did they feel sorry for him? When the bell rang, Marcus threw away his trash and headed to his afternoon classes. The encounter with Tyler's group replayed in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He had faced bullies before, but never in a place where he had absolutely no allies or backup. At his old school, there had always been someone who knew him, someone who might step in or at least witness what was happening. Here, he was completely on his own. His afternoon classes passed in a haze of nervousness and distraction. Teachers introduced themselves and went over classroom rules, but Marcus's mind kept drifting to the gym and what might be waiting for him there. Part of him wanted to skip the whole thing and take the bus straight home. He could tell his parents that he had decided to focus on academics rather than sports this year. But another part of him, the part that had spent countless hours shooting baskets in his driveway and dreaming of playing college ball, refused to back down. Tyler and his friends had made assumptions about him based on his quiet demeanor and modest appearance. Maybe it was time to show them that they had underestimated the new kid from Ohio. As the final bell rang, Marcus made his decision. He would go to the gym, play their game, and prove that he belonged here just as much as anyone else. What could possibly go wrong? The gymnasium echoed with the sound of bouncing basketballs and squeaking sneakers as Marcus pushed through the heavy double doors. The familiar smell of floor wax and sweat hit his nostrils, bringing back memories of countless hours spent in similar spaces back home. For a moment, his nervousness was replaced by excitement as he watched several pickup games already in progress on the various courts. Tyler spotted him immediately, as if he had been watching the entrance waiting for his arrival. He was standing, courtside with Jake and Connor, along with several other students Marcus didn't recognize. They were all bigger than Marcus, with the kind of athletic builds that suggested years of serious training and protein shakes. "Well, well," Tyler called out, his voice carrying across the gymnasium loud enough to turn heads. "Look who actually showed up. I wasn't sure if Ohio had the guts to back up all that talk." Several students stopped what they were doing to watch the interaction, sensing drama in the making. Marcus walked over to the group, his gym bag slung across his shoulder and his game face already sliding into place. He had learned long ago to hide his emotions during competition, whether he was nervous, excited, or angry. The court was where he felt most confident, most like himself, and he wasn't about to let these guys intimidate him in his element. "Just need to change into my gear," Marcus said calmly, nodding toward the locker room. He noticed how Tyler's friends were sizing him up, probably making bets about how quickly they would embarrass him. A small crowd was beginning to gather, word apparently spreading that there was about to be some entertainment. In the locker room, Marcus changed into his basketball shorts and his lucky t-shirt, the one his old team had given him when he made varsity as a sophomore. The fabric was soft from countless washes, and wearing it made him feel connected to his previous success. He laced up his basketball shoes carefully, the same ritual he had performed before every important game. When he emerged from the locker room, the crowd around Tyler's court had grown larger. Marcus recognized some faces from his classes, including a few students who had seemed friendly during introductions. Now they were all gathered to watch the new kid either prove himself or get humiliated in front of half the school. Tyler was dribbling a basketball with exaggerated showmanship, spinning it on his finger and making difficult shots look effortless. He was clearly skilled, with the kind of smooth technique that came from years of organized basketball and expensive coaching. His friends were equally impressive during their warm-up shots, and Marcus began to understand why they were so confident. "Ready to see some real basketball, Columbus?" Tyler asked, tossing the ball to Marcus with more force than necessary. Marcus caught it easily, the familiar weight and texture grounding him in the moment. He dribbled a few times, getting a feel for the ball and the court surface. "What are we playing?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying better in the large space than it ever did in crowded hallways. On the basketball court, he felt like a different person, more confident and assertive than the quiet new kid who had spent the day trying to blend in. "First to 21, win by 2, Tyler announced. "My team against you and whoever wants to play with the new guy." He gestured toward the small crowd, clearly expecting no one to volunteer to be on Marcus's side. The implication was obvious. This was going to be a mismatch, with Marcus either playing alone or with reluctant partners. To Marcus's surprise, 2 students stepped forward. One was a tall, lanky boy named David, who had been in his chemistry class, and the other was a stocky kid called Miguel, who Marcus remembered from the cafeteria. They didn't look like star athletes, but they were willing to play, which was more than Marcus had expected. "Guess you found some charity cases to help you out," Connor said with a sneer, earning laughs from Tyler's supporters. But Marcus noticed that David and Miguel didn't seem bothered by the comment. They just took their positions and waited for the game to begin. The first few possessions went as expected. Tyler's team moved the ball with practiced precision, hitting shots and playing aggressive defense that forced turnovers. They scored the first 6 points while Marcus's team struggled to find their rhythm. The crowd was enjoying the show, with some students already making comments about how this was going exactly as predicted. But Marcus wasn't discouraged. He was studying Tyler's team, learning their tendencies and weaknesses. Tyler was definitely the best player, but he was also cocky, taking difficult shots when easier ones were available. Jake was strong but slow, and Connor relied too much on his height advantage instead of developing actual skills. During a timeout, Marcus gathered his teammates. "They're not as good as they think they are," he said quietly. "Tyler's going to try to show off instead of playing smart. Jake can't keep up if we run, and Connor's left hand is weak." David and Miguel nodded, their initial nervousness replaced by determination. They had been watching too, and they could see the same flaws Marcus had identified. This wasn't going to be the blowout everyone expected. When play resumed, Marcus began to take control of the game. His first shot was a simple layup off a fast break, but it served notice that he wasn't going to be intimidated. His second basket was a 3-pointer from the corner, launched with the smooth mechanics his old coach had drilled into him for hours. The crowd's energy shifted as Marcus found his groove. His passes were crisp and perfectly timed, setting up David and Miguel for easy shots. On defense, he was everywhere, stealing passes and disrupting Tyler's offensive flow. By the time the score was tied at 12, the laughter and mockery from Tyler's supporters had quieted considerably. Tyler was getting frustrated, forcing shots and arguing with his teammates when plays broke down. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had dismissed as an easy target. Marcus could see the anger building in Tyler's face, and he knew that was when people made their biggest mistakes. "Lucky shots," Tyler muttered, as they lined up for the next possession, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. Marcus just smiled and got ready to play defense, knowing that the real game was just beginning. The tension in the gymnasium was thick enough to cut with a knife as the game reached its crucial final minutes. The scoreboard showed 19-18 in Tyler's favor, but momentum had completely shifted to Marcus's team. What had started as an expected humiliation had transformed into a genuine competition, and the crowd was now fully invested in watching the underdog story unfold. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he brought the ball up court, his breathing steady despite the intensity of the game. His teammates David and Miguel had grown in confidence with each successful play, and they were now moving like they had been playing together for years rather than minutes. The chemistry between them seemed to rattle Tyler's team, who had expected to dominate through individual talent alone. Tyler was defending Marcus closely now, his earlier casual attitude replaced by grim determination. He had stopped showboating and was playing serious defense, but Marcus could see the frustration building in his opponent's eyes. Every successful shot, every clever pass, every defensive steal was chipping away at Tyler's carefully constructed image of superiority. "You're getting lucky, new boy," Tyler hissed as they battled for position. "This isn't going to last." But his words sounded hollow, more like he was trying to convince himself rather than intimidate Marcus. The crowd could hear the exchange, and several students exchanged meaningful glances. Marcus didn't respond verbally. Instead, he used his speed and agility to drive past Tyler for an easy layup, tying the score at 19 apiece. The gymnasium erupted in surprised cheers, with students who had been quiet observers suddenly becoming vocal supporters of the unexpected comeback. Tyler's frustration boiled over on the next possession. Instead of running their team's plays, he tried to take on Marcus one-on-one, attempting a complicated move that resulted in a turnover. Marcus scooped up the loose ball and quickly passed it to Miguel, who hit a wide-open jump shot to give their team a 20-19 lead. Now Tyler's team needed to score, and everyone in the building could feel the pressure mounting. Jake and Connor were looking at Tyler expectantly, waiting for their leader to pull off some miracle play that would restore their dominance. But Tyler was pressing too hard, trying to do too much by himself, instead of trusting his teammates. His attempted three-pointer clanged off the rim and David grabbed the rebound. Marcus called for the ball immediately, knowing this was their chance to end the game. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that they were about to witness something special. Marcus held the ball at the top of the key, surveying his options. He could see Tyler setting up for one last desperate defensive stand, his pride unwilling to accept defeat at the hands of the quiet new kid he had tried to intimidate. The gymnasium had grown surprisingly quiet, with everyone waiting to see how this unlikely story would conclude. Instead of trying to score himself, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including his teammates. He called a timeout, gathering David and Miguel around him like a seasoned veteran point guard preparing his team for the final play. "They're expecting me to take the last shot," Marcus said quietly, his voice calm despite the magnitude of the moment. "Miguel, I want you to set a screen for David. Tyler will probably switch to stay with me, which means David will have their weakest defender on him. Can you make that shot?" David's eyes widened with nervous excitement. He hadn't been expecting to be the hero of this moment, but he nodded with determination. "I can make it," he said, and Marcus believed him. When play resumed, everything unfolded exactly as Marcus had predicted. Miguel set a solid screen. Tyler switched defensive assignments to stay with Marcus, and David found himself with a clear look at the basket from 15 feet away. The pass from Marcus was perfect, hitting David right in his shooting pocket, with the ideal amount of force. Time seemed to slow down as David released his shot. The ball arced through the air while the entire gymnasium held its breath. Tyler's team scrambled to get a hand in David's face, but they were too late. The ball swished through the net with a satisfying snap that echoed through the suddenly silent building. Game over, 21-19. The explosion of noise that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced at his old school. Students who barely knew his name were cheering like he had won the state championship. David and Miguel were jumping around, like they had just accomplished something impossible, which in many ways they had. Tyler stood frozen at center court, staring at the basket in disbelief. His carefully constructed image of invincibility had crumbled in front of half the school, and everyone present had witnessed his defeat. Jake and Connor were looking around awkwardly, unsure how to react when their leader had been so thoroughly outplayed. Marcus walked over to Tyler with his hand extended, offering the kind of sportsmanlike gesture his old coaches had always emphasized. "Good game," he said simply, his voice carrying no trace of gloating or revenge. He had proven his point without needing to humiliate his opponents. For a moment, Tyler just stared at the offered handshake. Marcus could see a range of emotions flickering across his face: embarrassment, anger, confusion, and something that might have been respect. The entire gymnasium was watching this interaction, understanding that how Tyler responded would define him just as much as the game itself had defined Marcus. Several long seconds passed before Tyler finally reached out and shook Marcus's hand. It wasn't enthusiastic and it wasn't particularly gracious, but it was something. "Yeah," Tyler muttered. "Good game." As the crowd began to disperse and the normal sounds of the gymnasium returned, Marcus gathered his gear and headed toward the locker room. Students he had never spoken to were patting him on the back and introducing themselves. and he could feel that something fundamental had shifted in his social standing at Lincoln High School. David and Miguel caught up with him before he reached the locker room door. "Man, that was incredible," David said, still breathing hard from the excitement. "I can't believe you trusted me with that last shot." "You earned it," Marcus replied. "We all did." For the first time since arriving at his new school, Marcus felt like he might actually belong here after all. Word of the basketball game spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire. By the time Marcus arrived the next morning, students he had never spoken to were nodding at him in the hallways and calling out greetings. The same corridors that had felt overwhelming and unfriendly just 24 hours earlier now buzzed with a different kind of energy whenever he walked through them. But Marcus noticed that Tyler and his friends were conspicuously absent from their usual spots around the school. They weren't lounging by the main entrance before classes started. They weren't dominating their regular table in the cafeteria, and they seemed to be actively avoiding the areas where they might encounter Marcus or the growing number of students who wanted to talk to him about the previous day's upset. Sarah Chen, a girl from his calculus class, approached Marcus at his locker between periods. She was one of the students who had been friendly from the beginning, but now there was something different in her demeanor, a kind of respect that hadn't been there before. "That was amazing yesterday," she said, adjusting her backpack straps nervously. "Nobody expected you to actually beat Tyler's team. He's been acting like the king of this school since freshman year." She paused, then added more quietly, "A lot of people have been waiting for someone to knock him down a peg." Marcus closed his locker and turned to face her fully. "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I just wanted to play basketball." This was true, but he was beginning to understand that his victory had meant much more to his classmates than just a simple pickup game. Tyler had apparently been intimidating students for years, and Marcus had unknowingly become a symbol of resistance. "Maybe," Sarah said with a small smile, "but you showed everyone that he's not as untouchable as he pretended to be. That matters more than you probably realize." She walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him to wonder about all the dynamics at this school that he was only beginning to understand. His teachers seemed different too, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly how. Mrs. Henderson smiled at him more warmly during English class, and Coach Rodriguez, who taught physical education, made a point of asking Marcus about his basketball experience. Even the cafeteria, workers seemed more friendly, giving him extra portions and engaging in brief conversations that felt genuine rather than polite. At lunch, Marcus found himself surrounded by students who wanted to sit at his table. David and Miguel were there, of course, having bonded with him through their shared victory. But they were joined by several others who introduced themselves and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him better. "You should try out for the varsity team," suggested Alex, a senior who played football in the fall and ran track in the spring. "Coach Martinez has been looking for a point guard ever since Tommy graduated last year. After what you did yesterday, I bet he'd love to see what you can do in a real game." The idea appealed to Marcus more than he wanted to admit. Basketball had always been his passion, and the thought of playing competitive high school ball again made his heart race with excitement. But he also understood that joining the team would put him in direct competition with Tyler, who was apparently one of the varsity players. "Tyler's not going to be happy if you show up at tryouts," Miguel warned, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. "He's been telling everyone who will listen that yesterday was just a fluke, that you got lucky with a couple of shots." Marcus considered this information while finishing his sandwich. He had hoped that beating Tyler's team might actually improve their relationship or at least end the antagonism, but it seemed like the opposite was happening. Tyler was apparently doubling down on his hostility rather than accepting defeat gracefully. "Let me ask you something," Marcus said to the group at his table. "What's Tyler's deal? I mean, why does he act like he owns this place?" The question had been bothering him since his first encounter with Tyler, and he figured his new friends might have some insights. Sarah, who had joined their table uninvited but was welcomed by the group, leaned forward conspiratorially. "His dad is some big-shot lawyer in town, and his mom is on the school board. Tyler's been the star of every team he's ever played on, and teachers always give him the benefit of the doubt when there's trouble. I think he's just used to getting his way. Plus, added David, he's never really been challenged before. Most people just go along with whatever he wants because it's easier than fighting him. You're probably the first person to beat him at something he cares about since middle school. This explanation helped Marcus understand why his victory had created such ripples throughout the school. It wasn't just about basketball. It was about power dynamics and social hierarchies that had been established long before he arrived. By defeating Tyler, he had inadvertently disrupted the established order and given other students permission to stop being intimidated. The rest of the week passed in a strange mixture of triumph and tension. Marcus was enjoying his newfound popularity and the friendships he was developing, but he could feel Tyler's resentment building like storm clouds on the horizon. They hadn't spoken since their handshake after the game, but Marcus caught Tyler staring at him across classrooms with an expression that promised their conflict was far from over. On Friday afternoon, Marcus was walking to his final period when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Tyler was talking to Jake and Connor near the science wing, his voice low but carrying just enough for Marcus to catch the dangerous undertones. "He thinks he's hot stuff now," Tyler was saying, "but I'm going to show him what happens when somebody tries to make me look stupid in front of the whole school. New boy is about to learn that beating me once doesn't make him king of this place." Marcus quickened his pace, not wanting to hear any more, but Tyler's words followed him into his chemistry class. The brief period of peace and acceptance was apparently coming to an end, and Marcus realized that his real test at Lincoln High School was still ahead of him. As he took his seat and tried to focus on the lesson about molecular structures, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler was planning something that would make their basketball game look like a friendly disagreement between gentlemen. The confrontation came on Monday morning, exactly when Marcus had been dreading it would. He was at his locker, gathering books for his first period class, when he sensed the familiar presence behind him. Tyler had chosen his moment carefully, positioning himself and his friends in the hallway, when it was crowded enough to draw an audience but early enough that teachers weren't yet patrolling the corridors. "We need to talk," Tyler announced loudly, his voice cutting through the morning chatter and causing nearby students to slow their pace and turn their attention toward the brewing conflict. Marcus could feel the energy in the hallway shift as word spread quickly that something was about to happen between the new kid and the school's former golden boy. Marcus closed his locker slowly and turned to face Tyler, keeping his expression neutral, despite the adrenaline now coursing through his veins. He had learned from his father that the first person to lose their temper usually lost the fight, regardless of who was right or wrong. Tyler looked different than he had during their basketball game, more desperate somehow, like someone who had spent the weekend stewing in his embarrassment and planning his revenge. "What do you want to talk about?" Marcus asked calmly, though he already knew the answer. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be Tyler's attempt to restore his damaged reputation by publicly humiliating the person who had dared to challenge him. "I want to talk about how you've been running your mouth all over school," Tyler said, stepping closer so that he was well inside Marcus's personal space. "Telling everyone how you made me look bad, how you're some kind of basketball star." The accusation was completely false, and Marcus suspected Tyler knew it, but truth wasn't the point of this encounter. The crowd in the hallway was growing larger as students abandoned their morning routines to watch the drama unfold. Marcus could see David and Miguel pushing through the crowd, worry evident on their faces, but he also noticed several teachers beginning to take notice of the commotion from down the hall. "I haven't been talking about our game," Marcus replied, honestly, keeping his voice steady and clear so that everyone present could hear him. "I played basketball, that's all. If you have a problem with how that went, we can always have a rematch." Tyler's face flushed red at the suggestion, and Marcus immediately realized he had made a mistake. Offering another basketball game only reminded everyone present of Tyler's previous defeat, which was exactly the opposite of what Tyler was trying to accomplish with this public confrontation. "This isn't about basketball anymore," Tyler snarled, and Marcus saw Jake and Connor moving to flank him, cutting off potential escape routes. "This is about respect, and you showing up to my school thinking you can just take over like you own the place." The irony of Tyler accusing someone else of acting like they owned the school wasn't lost on Marcus or the watching students, several of whom exchanged knowing looks. But Marcus also recognized that Tyler was beyond reason now, driven by wounded pride and the desperate need to reassert his dominance before his reputation suffered any more damage. "I'm not trying to take over anything," Marcus said, taking a small step back to give himself more space to maneuver if this situation escalated to physical violence. "I'm just trying to go to school and fit in like everyone else." "Fit in?" Tyler laughed harshly. "You think embarrassing me in front of half the school is fitting in? You think making me look like a fool is just some friendly game?" Marcus could see that Tyler was working himself up to something, probably hoping to provoke a reaction that would justify whatever he was planning to do next. The crowd was getting larger and more restless, sensing that this confrontation was about to cross a line from verbal sparring into something more serious. "Tyler, you're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be," Marcus said, trying one last time to defuse the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. "We played basketball. You lost. It happens to everyone sometimes." Those words were like throwing gasoline on a fire. Tyler's face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the front of his shirt and slamming him back against the lockers. The metallic crash echoed through the hallway, and several students gasped at the sudden escalation to physical violence. "You think you're better than me?" Tyler shouted, his face inches from Marcus's. "You think because you got lucky once you can come into my school and disrespect me in front of everyone?" The impact with the lockers had knocked the wind out of Marcus, but his mind was crystal clear. He could feel Tyler's hands shaking with adrenaline and anger, could smell the desperation in his opponent's actions. This wasn't about basketball anymore, if it ever had been. This was about a young man who had built his entire identity around being superior to others, and couldn't handle the first real challenge to that belief. Marcus had two choices. He could fight back, using the self-defense techniques his father had taught him, and probably escalate this into a full-blown brawl that would get them both suspended. Or he could do something that Tyler would never expect, something that might actually solve the real problem instead of just creating more violence. "Tyler," Marcus said quietly, his voice calm despite being pinned against the lockers. "What are you really angry about?" The question caught Tyler off guard. He had been expecting Marcus to either cower in fear or fight back, not ask him about his feelings. For a moment, his grip on Marcus's shirt loosened as confusion replaced rage on his face. "What?" Tyler stammered, clearly not understanding why. His victim was asking him personal questions instead of begging for mercy or throwing punches. "I'm serious," Marcus continued, his voice carrying just enough volume for the watching crowd to hear every word. "You've been the best at everything since you got here, haven't you? Basketball, grades, popularity, everything came easy. And now you're scared that maybe you're not as special as you thought you were." Tyler's friends, Jake and Connor, were looking at each other uncertainly, not sure how to respond to this unexpected turn in the confrontation. The crowd of students was completely silent, hanging on every word of this psychological chess match that had replaced the physical fight they had been expecting. "I'm not scared of anything," Tyler protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus could see tears of frustration beginning to form in Tyler's eyes, and he realized that beneath all the aggression and posturing was just a scared teenager who didn't know how to handle failure. "Everyone's scared sometimes," Marcus said, gently, and something in his tone seemed to reach Tyler in a way that anger or fear never could have. "I was terrified when I walked into this school last week. New place, no friends, everyone already in their groups. But being scared doesn't mean you have to hurt other people." Tyler's grip on Marcus's shirt went completely slack, and he took a step backward as if he were seeing Marcus clearly for the first time. The hallway remained silent except for the distant sound of a teacher's footsteps approaching, but no one seemed to notice or care about anything except the drama unfolding in front of them. "You don't understand," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone expects me to be perfect all the time. My parents, the coaches, the teachers. I can't just lose to some random new kid and pretend like it doesn't matter." Marcus straightened his shirt and looked Tyler directly in the eyes. "It doesn't have to matter unless you make it matter. Yesterday was just a basketball game. Today can just be Monday morning. Tomorrow we can both be different people than we were last week. For several long moments, Tyler stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by dozens of his classmates who were witnessing this unexpected moment of vulnerability from someone they had always seen as untouchable. Marcus could practically see the internal struggle playing out on Tyler's face as he wrestled with years of conditioning about weakness and strength, winning and losing. Finally, Tyler's shoulders sagged in something that looked like defeat, but felt more like relief. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and Marcus knew that those two words had cost him more than any physical fight ever could have. "We're good," Marcus replied immediately, extending his hand for the second time in a week. This handshake was different than their post-game gesture had been. This one felt like the beginning of something new rather than the end of something old. The crowd began to disperse as students realized that the show was over and there would be no violence to gossip about. Later, some looked disappointed, but many others seemed genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. Tyler's friends Jake and Connor approached cautiously, unsure how to react to this new version of their leader. As the hallway returned to its normal Monday morning rhythm, Marcus gathered his books and headed toward his first period class. Tyler walked beside him, neither of them speaking but both understanding that something fundamental had changed between them and in the social dynamics of Lincoln High School. When they reached Marcus's classroom, Tyler stopped and turned to face him. "One more time. For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you really are good at basketball. I was just too proud to admit it before." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had shared with Tyler since arriving at the school. "Thanks. Maybe we can be on the, same team sometime instead of playing against each other." Tyler nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, maybe we can." As Marcus walked into his English classroom, he realized that he had finally found his place at Lincoln High School. Not as the quiet new kid trying to blend in and not as the basketball star who had beaten the school's golden boy, but as someone who understood that real strength sometimes meant choosing understanding over conflict, compassion over conquest. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her desk and smiled at him warmly. "Good morning, Marcus. Ready for another day?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, taking his seat and pulling out his notebook. "I really think I am."